So if you don't mind, I'll probably start just that so we have enough time for questions in the end. So I would like to welcome you all for our webinar this afternoon. We are going to be talking about useful reporting and how to use your data to communicate findings and make recommendations for future actions. And it's going to be presented by CPEC members. My name is Vladka Kovar, and then we have also
Shannon Frey and Nicole Zwick.
Yeah, hi. So welcome again. And Shannon is going to be advancing my slides.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. Okay, so the objective for today's webinar is to be familiar with the data sharing decision-making framework. We also would like you to be able to select the best format for your data reporting, then also know how to identify and communicate key actionable steps and recommendations, and also understand the basic do's and don'ts of the graphic data display. Shannon, can you please? So the data sharing decision-making framework is such that first, you have to look at your data, right? So you need to either analyze them or review them and really truly understand them. Once you do that, then you determine your goal. And once you know what your goal is, then you would go and identify your audience and understand who your audience is. And based on your audience, you would select the most appropriate communication channels. Once you determine that, you can develop your message. Again, the message is going to be targeted toward your audience and based on the channels you selected. And then you create recommendations. Then you can select some other key data findings and then select the most appropriate visuals. Then you design the most compelling data sharing materials, and my colleagues are going to be talking about that in details. And then in the end, you can, of course, test them, test those materials, evaluate them, and if needed, you can adjust them so that you convey the message in the best way. Shannon, can you please?
Yeah, there's just a delay.
Okay, thank you so much. So first, as I said, the step is to review and analyze and understand your data. So to be able to demonstrate this framework, we created this hypothetical case, and we will walk you through it step by step. So our hypothetical case is not based on any specific county data. It's just our county XX. And we are pretending that we conducted key informant interviews with parents at school. And the results of that key informant interviews is pointing to parents' concern about the retailers selling the nicotine products to minors. So you start to think about, okay, is this a valid concern or not? How can I support that? And so you can go to the Healthy Kids Colorado survey and look through their data, and you will find that actually the percent of the students who use electronic vapor products in the last 30 days is around 41%. So, you know, it's a concerning number. And then you can also see that among those students or underage students who try to buy the tobacco or vaping products in the store, there is 72% who were actually not being refused because of their age. So that's very concerning as well. And to find a little more supporting data, you can also go to the state report of retailer compliance with underage tobacco sales. And then again, you find some data which support the argument that the retailers are actually not checking the age of those quotes and quotes customer who are conducting federal approved compliance checks, and that they are also less likely to ask for the identification if the minor is trying to buy the vaping products. So you take this information and now you have to start thinking about what is your goal? What do you want to achieve with that?
Yes, so first we're going to determine our goal. What is the outcome of interest? Are we using this
data that we found created, analyzed to share progress with stakeholders? Are we trying to educate the community on what's going on? Are we using this in some kind of grant submission? Because your goal will influence the type of product that you're going to create. And I just want to point out that this step is kind of malleable. You can move it before or after the next couple of steps. You may decide you identify your audience first, or so you determine which order those are going to go in. That's fine. So in this hypothetical case, first we're going to look at what is the goal, what do we want to accomplish? So maybe we are looking for increased compliance with age restrictions on sale of nicotine products. Maybe we want community education on the prevalence of youth using nicotine products overall. Maybe we're trying to light a fire under local officials to crack down on existing policies to protect youth. I mean, what else? We could be looking at a bevy of other messages, goals that we're trying to accomplish here.
So once you know what your goal is, but as Shannon was saying, sometimes you actually start with the audience, but in our case, we started with the goal. So now you need to identify who it is you want to communicate this message to, and also what would be the best way of communicating what you want to be communicating. So the best practice would be to identify all the audiences. And then with your goal in mind, then you identify the information needs and the expectations for each group. And then you select the data sharing method that you think would be the most compatible with your goal and your audience. And then you also structure the material to resonate most with the audience and reflect their level of knowledge and expertise. And this is a point we want to really stress, because it happens very too often that we might be experts in our fields, and so the terminology is very familiar to us, but if you use it to communicate certain messages, it might not be familiar to your audience. And so if you really want them to hear it, you have to think about the language you are using. So once you know who your audience might be, then you can actually use this matrix. And not all of the communication channels might be listed up here, but just for reference, you can think about, let's just select one, like the board members. And for them, an appropriate communication channel might be town meeting, or it can be abstract or brief, or it can be a short fact sheet. But if you want to communicate with potential founder, then maybe, town meeting is not the most appropriate, or maybe, the data analysis session is not what you want to use. Maybe you want to go more toward the formal presentation. And so again, it depends on whom you want to communicate, what is going to be the communication channel working the best for that audience. So for this hypothetical case, we are thinking about the audience as an individual or a group that can contribute to positive change. So for this case, we identified the district and school representatives, parents, city council, and also the tobacco retailers, because we feel that, if they are part of that whole issue, they should be at the table. But of course, the communication will be slightly different from how we communicate with the rest of those identified audiences. But again, you are the expert, you are in the field, you might be able to identify more groups you want to be talking to. This is just a little print screen from a wonderful website by Stephanie Evergreen, and she talks about too long didn't read concept, when you really don't need to always go to those long reports, which people might not have time to read, and sometimes less is more if your message is really targeted and focused. But sometimes the report is really appropriate, and what you can do, and again, Shannon and Nicole are going to talk about that more in details, it's like you can start with some summary and then go to the details if needed. So for this hypothetical case, what would be the best communication channels? So for the district and school representatives, we thought that probably the brief would be the best. For parents, we could use some infographics or fact sheets. To city council, on the other hand, might benefit from what I just mentioned, some brief on the top of some longer report where they can find a little more details if they need to. And for the tobacco retail, they probably wouldn't be interested in the 25 pagers. So for them, again, some shorter version like infographic would be the most appropriate. What you have to keep in mind, though, is that all of those forms of communications should really talk about why you should care about the issue, what we know about the issue, what are we currently doing about the issue, and also some recommendations for action.
Next step is to develop your message. What are the takeaways? What do you want to say? What are the lessons that you've learned that you want to share? And what are the actionable steps? So it's important during this part to differentiate between what you found, what you know, what you've demonstrated, and what you want your audience to know. This is the part where you are the expert, you know all the things and have all the data that you've looked at, and hopefully probably are impassioned about the topic, and to be able to differentiate what you need, what all the things that you know, and what you want to be able to communicate with your audience. As Vladka mentioned before, with the language stuff, that it may be very familiar to you, but less so to other people. Same thing in your messaging of how you're not just language, but what you're talking about as a whole. I want just to point out that you aren't trying to hide anything here, but that not everything is relevant. You're going to have a lot more information than you can even communicate, even in that 25-page report that you would put out together. So the most important part is what you want your audience to remember. In this hypothetical case of vaping in Essex County, what is our message? So maybe for the district and school representatives, our message is that vaping is present and prevalent in the community, and thus it's happening within the school community as well, that students have relatively easy access to vaping products. That might be the message there. Recommendations are going to come in just a minute. Maybe for parents, we want to emphasize that teen vaping is on the rise, and here are some statistics you should know. Maybe it's talking about vaping is dangerous. Here are the data and long-term health risks. Maybe it's we want to share a message about how the nicotine industry is unfairly targeting your family, and here's how they're doing it. Those are all different ways we could do. I'll just point out again, this is a totally hypothetical situation, and we did not take into account all the pieces that you guys are responsible for living within and all of that stuff when we created our fake scenario. Okay, so maybe for the city council, the message is that we need stricter enforcement of existing policies, like those age laws and whatnot. Maybe it's that we have the potential to drive down youth use with decreased access, and how we can get that to happen. And then again, that 180 shift to tobacco retail, maybe the messaging there is that existing policies are going to be enforced. There could be fines and loss of tobacco retail licensure, and that those kinds of violations will have a negative impact on their retail sales overall if they're not able to have those products in the store at all, or whatever it is. Again, totally hypothetical. I know you guys exist in a somewhat different what you're working on stuff. So our next step is to create recommendations. So we have a message that we're going to share, and now the end of our part of our product, we're going to say, here's what we think you should do about it. So the next steps and what does it all mean? And again, as I said, you are the expert. You've distilled all this information down to a few messages. So the recommendations come to, what do you think should happen next? What do you want to share with your audience? How do your recommendations lead to change? And what language do you use to ensure your message is clear and easily understood? A reminder that stakeholders may or may not implement your recommendations, but they are certainly yours to provide, to give as the expert, with all the things that we know, this is where we think everything should go next. And then to consider here is, how do you measure or track successes and challenges that could come from here out if these recommendations are implemented? So again, in our hypothetical, what are the recommendations? So for district and school representatives, our recommendations might be how to partner with community to push for more enforcement of legal standards and to help protect youth. For parents, it might be, the recommendation might be to get involved in advocacy efforts to educate yourself and your peers on what's going on, how you can help, and what your advocacy could do. In city council, the recommendations might be on the effects of increasing compliance checks, or that compliance checks need to increase, I guess could be how to say that, and fines or loss of licensing for tobacco retailers on youth access and use. And for tobacco retail, the recommendations might be really practical, and include resources for retail policy best practices, employee training and protocols, and resources on nicotine products, sales and policies. It might include having more store signage and getting a top-down commitment to retail sales policies, including compliance checks. I mean, and then you can go on from there, obviously, with any of these. Your recommendations are probably one that you're going to have to draw back on at the end, because again, you're the passionate person with so much information and detail on all of this that you'll have to draw back a little bit.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the data viz part of it. See if I can take over Shannon's computer. There we go. So at this point, you know what message you want to convey to everyone, and you know your audience that you're looking to target. It's helpful to evaluate the data findings that you have to support your message. We're going to use the message, selling vaping products to minors is contributing to the overall youth vaping problem, just to give us some context. First, we're going to ensure that the findings best convey the message and gets the message crossed. For not all data are equally important to this specific message. So when we go through this list, we're going to be looking for things that actually target the selling of vaping products. So if we look at the data findings on the right, you'll see that the first one is talking about parents identifying selling nicotine. That goes directly with our message. So we would keep that in something that we want to put in the deliverable. The second finding you'll see talks about vaping products being used in 30 days. It's about 41%. That is actually important for the context of the overall youth vaping problem that you want to keep in that deliverable to show the reason why you even want the retail to be limited. If we look at the last finding, you'll see that it's about 47% of high school students would use vaping product if their best friend offered it. It's a really important finding, and you might be tempted to put it in, but unfortunately, it doesn't actually support this specific message on retail selling to minors. So we're going to actually remove it. See if I'm making sure that works. The next thing you would want to do is also summarize your data findings. You may know all of the details, and that's really important, but the audience doesn't necessarily need to know them. Reducing the data down can help kind of focus on the areas that you want the attention to go. You're always trying to think through the limited time you have with the audience's attention and use it wisely. So using space on the deliverable needs to be thought through of what is the most important for that specific message. You can use another data finding for another deliverable. So you'll see the long-winded kind of where high school students are buying vaping products. And even though it's still important for this specific message, there's a way to kind of summarize it down to really focus on it's where that's being bought, not specific stores. That's going to get lost in the details. So the next step that we suggest is be flexible with your data. What we mean by this is add or subtract your data findings based on what supports your message. And this can actually change throughout a process. So once you've drafted your deliverable, you may decide that there are too many data findings, that the message becomes lost. So then you need to decide what can be removed. And other times there's not enough data that's supporting your message. Then you want to go back to your data and see what else you can find. Here we're finding another data finding from the state retail compliance data, saying that we've got some violations that occurred through these years. So this would be important to support our message. And lastly, depending on the deliverable and audience, the data you want to present can change in the complexity. As Shannon and Block have already stated, a report is a great place for more complex data, like a forecast line trend, or even more details on the methodology. But really keep it simple for infographics. Use the single number visual is a really good tool. Once you've selected the data findings that best fit that message, the audience, and your type of deliverable, then you want to select the data visuals that have been proven to be effective in conveying the data. There's been so much research that people have done and found what people perceive best on the data and remember it. These are just some types of charts that are out there you can use. They get a little complex, but you can find them all over the place. We just suggest that you find a couple that go to each type of graph, and then pick them that based on your deliverable, based on your audience, and really refine them to your work, and then use them constantly. Then branch out to new ones, but just have your go-to, and that's our next slide. This is our team's go-to slide. It's been basically using proven efficient types of charts that are broken down into 6 categories of your data findings. If you're making an infographic or a brief, we suggest using at least a single number, a word meaning, and then one of the in-between ones is because it has a little bit more data-heavy chart on an infographic, and then you can use numerous on a report. We're going to go briefly through a couple of these examples just to give you a feel, but remember, you do have a great resource of our communications. They are really good at data visuals. So the first one that is universal across all of the deliverables is a single number. Single number is the most used across all communication mediums. You'll always see them in the news. You'll see them on infographics, and kind of see them all over the place. They always highlight the most important number. So here you're always going to see us highlighting an example and then doing the most common way, which is the first one, and then a couple of the more effective types that are out there. So for this one, we're looking at the 41% of students using a vaping product in the last 30 days. So the 41 or 40.7 is really the most important thing. So starting here, you see that we use the typical pie chart or donut. You can use a donut chart. There is some controversy over the use of using pie charts because they do find that people don't interpret the slices correctly. So do not use them, or use them cautiously, I should say, if you're using them beyond 3 categories. But they are really actually good for a single number. So here, the thing that we want people to take away when they see it is that 40.7. So here, the best way is to highlight it in color, bold the number, bring it out on the page. Another useful thing is to gray anything that's needed as data, but not important. So you'll see how we did that. The next 2 are kind of more effective ways of doing it, and you can do a lot of variation, is putting that number first. It's called the number with text, and you have it highlighted. You can add a color just to the number. It really pops, and use simple text with really good readable fonts will really help show that 41% of students vape. I mean, it catches your eye, and that's a really good source of putting it anywhere in an infographic. So the last one that you'll see on this list is kind of a fun one to play around with. It's using icons. The only thing we suggest on the icon part is make sure they're simple icons that people recognize. So this is where we'll talk about testing your deliverable. This is a great piece. Like, please tell me, does that look like a student? Does that, or it's also making sure you're culturally sensitive at this part. I do have like just teams to challenge yourselves. Like, are we being sensitive to everyone? Is this appropriate? There's some really good sites we give that have been working on all kinds of health equity ones. It's called the Noun Project. That's a really good source of trying to find the correct ways that we can actually represent things with icons. But I recommend using color again, highlighting what is important in the color, graying anything else out, making sure that there's some kind of text with it, because we need to know what this icon is supposed to be representing. So our next one we picked, apologize. There we go. Our next slide is on looking at a comparison. And we're using the current vaping high school students reported purchasing in the stores, in the internet, in the mail. So we're really looking at this as great ways of comparing numbers, which is always practical in every kind of deliverable we're working with. A table is definitely okay. It's universal, but it does not attract people to wanting to read it as much. It's a great place in a report, but not necessarily in infographics or brief. So we recommend you switching to the other types. A column or vertical bar charts are definitely one of the best choices. They're easily interpreted. People know what they mean. They're just a great visual. So you can use them across all deliverables. Here, the things that we're talking about is make sure they're just really easy to read, signify the important data that you want to see. First is highlighted in a color, and the rest can be grayed. It doesn't mean it's not important. It just kind of tells the reader, this is what's important for this message. And we're looking at that physical store is what we really want to is important. And then putting the numbers directly on the bar really help people not have to look anywhere else. So that's a great sense. If you need to add any like specific detail, just putting it below with the star is fine too, because people know to read it if they need detail, but they're going to read the bigger things first. Another fun way to, another thing to do is using icons. I apologize. I have my phone off. And this again is what we talked about in the first one, where you need the single number. Just make sure that you use 1 to 2 colors for this too. Recognizable and appropriate icons. And you can use color. You can use the bolding of the numbers to kind of emphasize that those are important too. Our last thing is not switching. The slide does not want to move. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so words are incredibly powerful to get your message across, and there's many ways to use quotes or other qualitative data that you have. And so this is just a couple of suggestions that we found that are easy to interpret and just eye-catching. You'll see that I put the quote just as is not terrible. Always including a quote is important. I think it's a really powerful way to represent your data in your message. But there's some ways, just simple things by adding color to the words that mean the most to you in that. Also, you can have a font that just is super easy to read and just inviting to read, and just even like slightly reducing the parent. You'll see that's a little smaller size of font helps to pop the actual quote, the more important part of it. Another thing is call boxes. You don't even have to just use them for quotes. They're really wonderful for even just a single number data point you wanted to put them in or anything like that, but they really emphasize your message, but they also break up your deliverable. So it kind of helps the flow going. If you have too much text, people kind of start not wanting to read it all, but if you break it up with a nice visual of a call box, people again are like, ooh, that looks interesting, and kind of keeps their moving forward into the rest of the deliverable. So another great way you can actually do for quote is adding a picture. Everyone loves pictures. So if you had like a convenience store or a kid vaping at near a convenience store with the quote, that would be another good option. So lastly, we just wanted to briefly go over some of the quick tips for keeping your data visuals really easy and really nice for your deliverables. The very first one is reduce clutter. That entails many things. That's limiting your color, simplifying your text, using the best fonts, and removing distracting lines. You don't always have to keep people referenced unless it, you can tell the one on the left has just too much. It's too complicated to have to try to read the data. But if you go on the far right where you see the other line graph, we did keep the lines and that needed to be there, but they're not overwhelming. So just kind of play with what needs to be there for the data. You also just want to focus on the data you want to relay for that specific message. In the middle one that show the data, you see a scatter plot with all the black. Not all those points are important. So you can gray them so people can still see them. You highlight the ones you want. People can always ask you later to give you should always have later like the more detailed form of that for your report or just if anyone asks you. But for an infographic, highlight what you want them to see. So that's the most important thing. And then integrate text. You'll see that the series 1 and series 2 is within the actual graph. It's not a legend. Legends makes your eye go up and down, so you sometimes lose the meaning. So really just putting the words when possible in the graph helps people just know exactly what you mean. And on that, also use chart types. I grew up with the statistic way of doing, verses in like very formal titles. Go to a journalist style, state what they are. It's an increase in females going to college, which is really nice. But just be pointed of what your data is. You know your data more than anyone, and just state what it is. Always start at 0 for graphs, no matter what. Even if you're trying to emphasize like a change, it's really distorts people's view on it and they'll stop looking at it. If it's too complex of a graph, break it into smaller ones. It's okay to have them all next to each other. People will read them nicely. Use color to your advantage. So don't overcolor everything. Use the things that you want to highlight with color. And then use black, gray, are always good just to have in the background. And then just make sure that you use colors that are printable. So you really want to be black and white, just in case. Like blues still can be printed nicely in a black and white. They'll come out. Also think about people that are colorblind. There are sites to be able to pick the right colors for them. The bottom of this is just showing you how people perceive their attention span of what they just focus on right away. It's kind of a fun thing to look at, see what catches your eye, and use it to your advantage. Enclosure is one of my favorite. When something's enclosed, I will pick up on it and look at it. So those are really good tools just to use people's attention to where you want them. So, and to wrap it up, we just suggest that you find the charts that really work for you and refine them to fit like they're like go-tos to you. So you can refine them the way you like, the colors you like to use, and then you can branch out to the variations of those. Also we're gonna have this be put all together by Shannon and see how it comes together.
Awesome, thanks Nicole. I love, there's a couple, Nicole shared a lot of really awesome information there. One of the ones that we've been moving to in our presentations recently, and I think is really effective, is that journalist style titling, that instead of the blah, 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 like scientific writing style, being able to saying this increased over time. So it's like you're telling the people what they're looking at right there. Then you see the visual of what it is and it all comes together without having to interpret it yourself all the time. Okay, so where'd my mouse go? There we go. The next step is to design compelling data sharing materials. So in our hypothetical case, what kind of materials are we looking at for the different groups? So for school representatives, I chose that we were going to do a data brief, and this might accompany no, actually, okay. For school representatives, we're going to do a data brief. For parents, we could do the data brief, or we created an infographic that shares out our message and recommendations easily. For the city council, we could use that same data brief, but then it could accompany a full report. So maybe there is that 25-page report or whatever it is that has a lot more in-depth detail about all the different measures and where they came from and how the different pieces come together and what the recommendations mean and how you implement that and all that stuff. But our data brief is going to give the high level overview to get you interested enough to open up that 25-page report. And then for our tobacco retail, it might be a targeted brief or some kind of infographic or something that we can use when we're trying to get in the door and sit at the table with these different groups to talk about what's going on. So these are kind of just the little overview of a mock-up of what we did. For this first one, this could be the data brief that we did for school representatives and city council. As we talked about earlier on, so I have like a title and then a little bit of why this is so important. I have maybe some bullet points of what is so important about this. And here's one of Nicole's call out boxes. They were like, oh, someone said this is a big problem. Then looking at vaping among students, what we know, we're maybe going to use some of these different visual techniques to display the information. And you can see that each one of these is a little bit different, so that when I walk away, I remember that the 4 out of 10 was one thing, 72% related to something different. And like that each of those is separate in my head. I didn't use donuts or pie charts for each of them, that then I can't remember which pie chart went with which description, or like the statistics don't get confused. I remember that these go together. That bar chart that I saw was where students are purchasing products, and it's overwhelmingly at physical stores and stuff. And so then that is leading our next part of what we're going to do about it. Maybe I'm going to share some more information that didn't pull out as well in a graphic. Obviously, text is still a huge part and priority in the information, but where you can break it up and use some different things, it's just more engaging for all the people you're trying to work with, right? And again, I'm going to walk away remembering some of these graphic pieces, and then what I read in the data is going to emphasize that. So our next section is what we are currently doing about it, the measures that are in place, the activities that our program is doing, whatever that might be. And then finally, the recommendations for action. Given all this and more, here's what we have to tell you about what needs to happen. This is how we could implement it, all that kind of stuff. And again, this makes it then an easy one page. It's not even like a full one page of text, right? It's one page and it's all broken up into these different things. I can glance at different parts of it. I know what I'm looking at. I'm getting useful information that is relevant to the topic at hand from that. And again, if I am in a position that I need more information, I can either come back and ask for the bigger report or more information or whatever it is. I'll say obviously, even though it's not obvious because I didn't put it on our mock-up, but you would have your program's information on here, whether it's the website and the contact or whatever that is on there, and then be able to have the sites and sources for all the different kinds of data information that you would have. Okay, so for this parents one, maybe I'm making a pretty easy infographic that I want to share the information that, again, 4 out of 10 students have vaped in the last 30 days. 72% of underage students were not refused sale of vaping products. Here is my parent comment, and then I have some information about what's going on and a little bit more detail about that. Again, here we took that icon graphic about where students are getting things and made it really easy to determine. Here's a store, here's on the internet, here's the mail, and an easy to understand title. There could definitely be more text throughout this, but this is kind of how we set it out. And then this bottom section, we would have information about our messaging and our recommendations, our messaging being our recommendation being how to get involved with advocacy efforts and whatnot to help move forward, how to maybe it's petition or lobby or whatever it is and I think those are all words that we're not allowed to use instead, but you know what I mean. What the next steps are for anyone who's reading this and how they can be part of the change. Advocate. Thank you, Terry. And then our last one over here might be the sketch of what I would do for tobacco retailers. Again, as we're approaching different groups to try to get in the door and have a conversation about what's going on and the long-term implications for them. And again, this is a 180-degree perspective on how it's going to affect them. Where over here, we're looking at how it's affecting youth. We might be sharing long-term health implications, costs to of days of work lost, all those kinds of things that are public health measures. And over on the other side, we might be sharing our findings and then information about how loss of retail licensure can lead to loss of sales for your store overall, and not just tobacco sales, but sales as a whole, because people aren't showing up to shop at your store because you don't have any of the tobacco products, and even though they are of age, they can't buy them, all these different things. And then what you can do, and again, in our recommendations, it might be resources we can share and best practices and stuff like that. So we can talk about how to make sure that your store isn't one that is going to get in trouble for selling to underage minors and all those kinds of things. And then we might include some more resources for that. So then the last step is to test, evaluate, and adjust. And this is an important step. You go through all this work to develop a great product, and then you really need to go back and make sure that, again, your message is the message you mean to be sharing. So you're going to pilot test your materials, preview your materials within your program, other people who have worked on it, who haven't worked on it. I know every time we take one of our anythings to our team meeting, even though it's people that totally have the same understanding we do, there's 1,000 different perspectives on, okay, well, this isn't totally clear in this and this and this. So some part of it is going to be like your artistic and professional license, and part of it is going to be the input from others, right? So make sure you're having people preview, and then preview with people outside of your group, outside of your program, and maybe with members of the targeted audience, so that you know that, again, you're using the appropriate language, that you're using infographics or displays that are meaningful and easy to understand. Something that, again, makes so much sense to you as a professional in this arena may not come off as obvious to someone else. And you want to make sure you get those things figured out before you print 500,000 of whatever it is you're doing, right? Yep, and you making sure that the messages that you're putting out there are received as they're intended, so that you have a clean, clear product that you're putting out. The other thing to consider at this point is whether you need to do a pre-post evaluation of any of these materials. Is that if there is a learning part of it or anything, do you want to see what people knew ahead of time and what they knew at the end? And that might not be for your entire general public or larger audience that you're putting it out for, but for a small, again, pilot group of people to see if you're communicating what you think you're communicating. And then, of course, adjust the materials as necessary so that you're creating a clean, clear, and effective product. Okay, so with all of that information, hopefully now you should be able to be familiar with the data sharing decision-making framework, look at different formats and select what is best for the data you have, or at least come up with a couple different options. Know how to identify and communicate key actionable steps and recommendations. And remember, that's really important. You are the expert in what you're doing here, right? And that it is okay. A lot of times, especially in scientific writing, step back and have a lot of like, here's all the information, let me put it out there for you to see and interpret. And in a lot of cases, we need to kind of take that off the table. And here's all the information that we have. Here is what I think you should do about it. Here is what the next steps should be. And that is a really important part of sharing out your information, right? And then understand the basic do's and don'ts of graphic data display from all the beautiful stuff Nicole went through. Here's a whole bunch of, if you want to screenshot this, or we'll be sharing out all the information from this shortly. but a bunch of resources that are really great for if you want to do the building of the infographics and stuff. There are templates for presentations and all the different pieces of putting the cool graphics together with, again, those like easy to interpret icons, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of great information here, books. And then we want to make sure you mention that the media TA group here for STEP also has some expertise in this. And I believe that there are some shared templates behind the scenes at the tobaccofreeco.org website. So don't forget that those are there, and that while we are happy to help you with any of this also in your evaluation and that side of it, I know that they would be happy to help with, from a media perspective, putting things together as well. So with all of that, are there any questions? I love it. You're all going to go off and create brilliant products to share out with your community, to share back with us and with STEP, and it's going to be amazing. We really wanted to be able to empower you to feel good and confident in the products you're making with this. So, okay, hit me with any questions. I'm going to stop the recording while you guys are all thinking.
Yeah, this is Heather. Thank you so much for this, the data